Welcome to Arslan Learning. In this video we are going to learn all about clefs. So as you may know, there are many different clefs that we use in music. In this video I'm going to teach you a little bit about all of them, and we're going to discuss some interesting facts about how we came to have the clefs that we have. So in this video we're going to talk about 4 basic clefs. They're the ones that you really need to know. We have, from left to right, we've got the bass clef, then we've got tenor and alto. Those look quite similar. We'll look at how they're different a little later. And finally we have treble at the end. So let's talk about how we got this funny word clef in the first place. So in Latin the word clavis means key, and that came into Old French, and over time it became clef. And because the French like to get rid of letters, it's now something like clé. But in Latin it is clavis. And there we have an example of medieval Gregorian notation. So there's a beautiful Latin chant, Kyrie eleison. Well, the words are actually Greek, but the chant pattern there is a Latin Gregorian chant. And clefs in the beginning, they began as letters. So at the bottom there you can see that looks like a letter G, and then it's written in a more cursive style, and then a G and a D. So what they would do is that they would write the letter at the beginning, and that letter indicated the bass note that would either be hummed by a bass voice or on the organ, whatever it may be. And so that gave the chant, or the sequence that they were trying to write down, that gave it its bass note or its key as we know it. And over time, these letters became stylized and they became the clef symbols that we know now. So how did that happen? Well, let's have a look. On the left there, we see a G and a D. So the bass note was a G, and they indicated a D above that. And that became, over time, by linking them together, you can see how that became that blue treble clef. So just like when we write something, we develop a very certain way of writing it, like your signature or your name. In the same way, over hundreds of years, if we keep on writing the same symbol by hand, eventually people find a way to just do it quickly and make it look nice at the same time. And that is how we ended up with, for example, the treble clef. So let's begin there with the treble clef. This is the clef used by soprano voices and instruments. So it's for higher voices. It's also known as the G clef because, as we saw, it was formed by a letter G. On this stave, you can see the middle C and the C 1 octave higher. So if you want to learn the violin or the flute or any high-voiced instrument, you need to know the treble clef. We see that middle C is written in this clef with an extra ledger line. And the ledger line runs through the head of the note, and then the higher C is up there in the second space from the top. So there's a C octave in the treble clef. The next one is the alto clef. This is the clef that we use for the alto line. Nowadays, it's mostly used by the viola. So a viola, if some of you may know, is like a violin, but it has a deeper register. And so it's not quite soprano, it's the alto line. The position of middle C in this clef is shown below. So we call alto clef a C clef because, as we see there, where the alto clef symbol intersects with the middle line, that is where we put middle C. So we can refer to alto clef as a C clef. So if you have to read alto clef, you can always orient yourself by looking at where that symbol intersects the middle line. That is your middle C, and you can work out from there. Now, tenor clef is also a C clef. You'll notice it's exactly the same symbol as alto clef, but it's in a different position. This time, the second line from the top runs through there, so that is where middle C is for tenor clef. So this clef is for tenor voices, which are lower than alto voices. This clef is mostly used by the upper range of the cello, as we see there, and the bassoon. So the bassoon is a woodwind instrument, and it's quite low in register. So for its upper notes, they will sometimes read the tenor clef. In this diagram, you can see the position of middle C. So again, if you have to read tenor clef, you can just remember that the second line from the top, that is where we find middle C, and we can remember that by noting that it intersects the tenor clef symbol. And last but definitely not least, we have bass clef. We also call this the F clef. So this clef is for the lowest voices. Instruments like the cello and double bass use this clef, but really any instrument with a very low register will use the bass clef. You also need to learn this clef to play the piano, of course. Your left hand on the piano will usually be written in the bass clef. On this stave, we can see middle C and the C one octave down. So we note there that middle C in the bass clef has an extra ledger line, just like middle C in the treble clef had, but this time it's on the top. And then the lower C is in the second space from the bottom. So the bass clef mirrors the treble clef in that way. So let's quickly remind ourselves, we've spoken about the word clef, which comes from clavis in Latin, which means key. We spoke about the medieval notation and how these clefs all developed out of medieval musical notation. We had bass, tenor, alto, and treble. Now let's recap the instruments that go with each clef. So for treble clef, which is also called G clef, we have high voices, instruments like violin, flute, clarinet, piccolo, anything really that's in a high register. Next one, we have the alto clef, which is a C clef. Nowadays, it's really only reserved for the viola. Middle voices in the orchestra, that's just the viola really. So if you learn the viola, you get your own clef, which is quite neat, but you also have to learn the treble clef to play the viola because some of your music gets written up there. The next one, the tenor clef, is also a C clef. That's for lower voices, and that's the upper register of things like a cello and a bassoon. And finally, we have the bass clef all the way at the bottom there. That's an F clef. And cellos, double basses, pianos, bass guitars, all of them, they use the bass clef for their notes. So I hope you have enjoyed this. You'll need to know all of your clefs for music theory. And even if your instrument doesn't use, if your instrument only uses one of these clefs, it's still important that you understand the other clefs to some degree. Clefs really are just there to give us a frame to read our notes in. And the more you learn about clefs, and the deeper your knowledge is of other instruments, the better the musician you will become. So when you've done watching this video, read the article in the description below. There's lots more information for you there. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.